Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 120 in the series. Welcome back to the Yarn Room, and a big welcome especially to those of you who have been following along for quite some time now, 120 episodes worth. It's always lovely to see you, and I so appreciate all the emails and the comments and our Ravelry group, and the conversations that we're having are really amazing. So thank you so much for creating this community. And for those of you who are new, I've noticed a few new faces over on Instagram and then here in the comments in the past month or so. Welcome. It's lovely to have you. Wherever you came from, I'm so glad you're here. And if you're curious about what this podcast is about, this is usually a podcast about garment design and modification and some DIY tips and tricks and things like that. I also do a lot of other things like spinning and hats and shawls and mittens and, you know, I'll knit anything, but I do love focusing on sweaters. And since there are so many of you who are new, I feel like I need to do a little bit of an introduction. So for those of you who are like old school, skip ahead 10 seconds or so. But I'm a professor and in an English department, and I teach things like literature and science fiction and speculative fiction. And when I'm not doing my day job, I am pretty much knitting 100% of the time. So if I'm, you know, that saying, like if I'm sitting, I'm knitting, it's actually pretty true for me. And for those of you who have been following along for a while, you know that I'm also interested in knits in translation and rare and interesting knitting books, and basically all the different traditions of knitting, and just, you know, I very into like historical research and pattern modification and math, and yeah, pretty much you name it. If it's about knitting, I'm into it. So there you go. That's me in a nutshell. And I would love for any of you who are new, you're welcome to come on over to our Ravelry group and introduce yourself over there. I would love to meet you and know a little bit more about your own knitting and where you're coming from and, you know, what you're interested in. So hit me up over there. I usually also tell you where you can find me. So I have a website, knittingthestash.com, that covers just about everything knitting related. So all my classes and tutorials are over there. It's also where you can find the Flock Farm Yarn Shop, which features small batch and indie producers of yarns. So lots of people around the country who have small flocks. They produce small batch yarns, and I'm working on collecting them all for the shop so that the shop can be one of those hubs where you go if you're looking for a cool small batch indie yarn. Right now we have yarn from Montana and New Hampshire, Illinois, Iowa, and I'm working on Utah right now. So yeah, we're just trying to get as many different flocks in the shop as possible. And for those of you who are interested in these sample packs that we talked about a couple episodes back, I am going to be putting together a pre-sale for that, or a pre-order for that. So watch your inbox if you're a subscriber, and you'll get one of those notifications soon, either this weekend or probably next weekend, because we have the little, you know, kids coming home for the weekend thing going on. So it'll probably be next weekend. And I will be doing a pre-order for those sample packs. If you're interested in trying out a bunch of different yarns from the shop, you know, in mini skeins to see how they knit up, and you do little swatches and check them out, this will be a great opportunity. And if you're not on the subscription list, you can always go over to knittingthestash.com and sign up there. Just put your email in and you'll get on that list, and then you'll get all of the updates and coupons and special offers and everything like that. Yeah, right in your inbox, which is kind of fun. So on today's episode, I have a finished Carbeth cardigan, which I can't wait to tell you about. It's full of modifications, and it was knit up in a really beautiful 100% Jacob wool from a small farm near me right now in New York. So I want to talk all about their work. And I thought we'd talk a little bit about Jacob sheep, because this is 100% Jacob. Plus, if you're interested in the needle conversation, the knitting needle conversation that we had last episode, I would highly recommend that you head over there to check out all the tips and tricks and information that people shared about their interchangeable needle sets. They're all in the comments, and it's a wealth of information. I learned things that I didn't know about knitting needle sets, so I hope you will too. And it actually led to a knitting needle exchange between me and Kim of Fairily Fiber Fun. And Kim sent me some beautiful hand spun, which I reviewed on an earlier episode, and knit into a hat designed by Isabel Kramer. She does some beautiful work on her hand-spun yarn. It was 100% Gulf Coast native, really gorgeous. And she and I did a knitting needle exchange. So I had an extra set of Addie's interchangeables that I wasn't using, and she got in touch and said, hey, I know you do knitting needle trades sometimes. Would you be interested in some Hiya. So I got to try out some Hiyas. I have to say I absolutely love them. I thought I was totally like Addie all the way interchangeable, but this is my purple. I'm so excited it's purple. This is my purple Hiya set from Kim, and I will tell you what, I knit up a swatch in these, and it's amazing. The joins are really smooth and very tight. So my main problem with the Chow-goos was that they kept getting unscrewed as I knit, and we had a long conversation in episode 119 about that, because a lot of you said that wasn't a problem for you, and then others of you said it absolutely was a problem for you. So I think it's the way, it depends on how you knit. But these needles, I think, one of the reasons that they don't come unscrewed is that the actual screw length for the needles and cords is a little bit longer. It's a little bit of a deeper screw base than the Chow-goos. So what I'm finding is that when I'm screwing them in and then using the little rubber things to really crank them tight, there's not only that nice join, but they're not coming untwisted, and I knit an entire swatch, no problem. So I'm kind of excited about that, and I kind of wonder if these Hiyas aren't going to go way up on my list, in part because they solve yet another problem, which is that they go the right size range for me. So they go from size 2s all the way up to 8s, which is like the perfect range. So I have nothing but good things to say about these Hiyas so far. So thank you, Kim, for this exchange. And I hope you enjoy your Addie set. It was really great to get a chance to chat with you again and to do this knitting needle exchange. So thank you so much. So let's jump into the cardigan here. I am also wearing another cardigan. A few of you were wondering a couple episodes back, like, do you knit cardigans anymore? And you're right, I did go through quite a period of pullovers. So I'm wearing my Alias cardigan by Isabel Kramer, and it's actually in an Illinois Shetland small batch yarn that I dyed myself into this eggplant color. So I do knit cardigans, and I actually love them very, very much. I can't remember exactly why I stopped. I think it was because I was doing a lot of sample and test knitting for Albina and for Wool and Honey, the yarn shop up in Michigan. So yeah, I feel like I was doing a lot of that kind of test knitting, and then I ended up not knitting as many cardigans lately, but here we are, back to cardigans. So as many of you know, the Carbeth cardigan by Kate Davies is meant to be a very cropped cardigan. I did not go for that. I'm not a big skirt or dress or high pant wearer, so a cropped cardigan for me is not as useful as a regular length cardigan. So I went with adding, I think I added, let's see, I think I ended up at 13.5 inches for the body, and I think the original pattern calls for 7 inches, something like that. It's a very short and boxy cardigan. It's very beautiful on Kate in, you know, the styled as she was styling it. I'm just not that, that's just not my style. So I decided to modify it so that it would fit my style. So I made it a lot longer, 13.5 inches from hem, bottom of the hem up to the armpit. And it is a sweater that's knit holding worsted weight yarn double. So it is a chunky knit. And I'm going to try and see if I can bring it close here so that you can see the size of the stitches. It is a very, very chunky knit, but unlike other chunky knits that end up feeling, I don't want to say clunky, but I kind of do. Sometimes chunky knits can look a little clunky. This one has a lot of tailored aspects to it so that you don't get the clunk factor, even though you're holding your worsted weight yarn double, which is, that's a lot, that's a big thick, it's a big thick yarn, right? So I did end up using quite a bit more yarn than was called for in the pattern. My initial guesstimate was that I had enough with 6 skeins of the Jacob, and my Jacob was about 100 grams for 220 yards. So I kind of assumed that I would have enough with 6 skeins, but because I lengthened the body and I went with the longer sleeves, I decided that I didn't have enough yarn. So I ended up having to call up Jen and Blessing at Forget Me Not Farm, where I got the Jacob yarn, and say, do you happen to have 2 more skeins? And they were like, yes. So I was like, yay. And I just drove right over there and picked up the yarn. They're really amazing, and we'll talk about them in just a minute. So I did end up using 8 skeins, and this is all I have left, is this tiny little ball of yarn. And you can see it's wound up to be held double. It's you can see how thick and chunky that actually is once you hold it double. This is a 3-ply yarn, and It's really nicely spun. I wonder if you can see the twist here. Hopefully you can see the twist. It's a really beautiful 3-ply, and I believe it was spun around here, maybe at Battenkill, though I'm not positive, don't quote me on that one, but Battenkill Fiber Mill might be a possibility. And like I said, this is from Forget Me Not Farm, and they are just over in Candor, New York. They have a flock of really adorable Jacob sheep, and we're going to talk about Jacob sheep in just a minute. So for those of you who are familiar with the pattern, you will know that it is knit in the back and forth from the bottom up, and like a raglan, you would knit the body and the sleeves to a certain point and then join them all together to finish up the upper part of the sweater or the yoke. Now I did part of that, but I made some modifications based on what other knitters have done as well, so let me tell you about a few of those. I did knit the body bottom up to the armpits, but I didn't knit the sleeves bottom up. And in part, it was a yarn issue. I wanted to kind of conserve as much yarn as possible, so I didn't quite know how long I could make my sleeves in the end. And part of it was because I'm not a big fan of knitting sleeves bottom up and then attaching them. I'm just not, if I have to with this particular kind of raglan, sure, maybe I would. But what I prefer to do is knit my sleeves down from, sleeve stitches here and knit them down. That way you can try it on, you can check the length. It's kind of like getting the best of both worlds. You do the bottom up sweater, but you get the top down sleeves. So I followed Isabel Kramer's modification here, and once I got up to the armpits, instead of simply binding off and then waiting until I was done with the sleeves, I cast on the sleeve stitches here provisionally. So I had cast on these stitches and these stitches so I could continue to work back and forth all the way around. And since I did a provisional cast on, it meant that the stitches were live in both directions. So they were live for me so I could continue finishing the sweater yoke, and they were then live when I went back to pick them up off the cord that I had left them on to knit the sleeves downward. Now that does create a tiny difference in the orientation of your stitches if you're going to do this. If you're a real stickler for this kind of thing, it might bother you, but I think you won't be able to tell where I cast on provisionally. If you look really, really closely, you can see that there is a line right here where the stitches don't quite line up exactly because one set of stitches is going up and the other set of stitches is going down. I don't think it's very noticeable, especially if you cast on loosely enough so that you're not, cinching up your stitches in some kind of way and creating a tension issue. Otherwise, you can't really notice, and it makes for a really awesome knitting experience for your sleeves, I think. So I did the provisional cast on for the sleeves so that I could knit them down. I did knit them a little bit longer. I made the sleeve cuff the same length or width, whichever way you're measuring, as the hem down here, and I also made my hem a lot wider than what Kate Davies has in the pattern. So I think the original pattern has something like the button band, about an inch or so for the hem, but because I was going with a longer body, I knew that I wanted a slightly chunkier, longer hem just to offset it proportionally. So these are all just different decisions I was making as I was going along. I also followed, and I can't remember her name now, I'll put it right down here on the screen. Some brilliant knitter decided that it would be a good idea to add some short rows at the top above the reductions that create this awesome kind of, what do you call that? It's not like a distressed look. It's like a very visible seamed kind of look because these are all decreases that are laying flat on top of the fabric so you can kind of see them. Just like a raglan seam, except that it's not at the raglan point. It's across the back and across the front, so it's really kind of fabulous. But this one knitter did some cool short rows up at the top to add just a little bit of difference between the back and the front. And I'm going to see if I can bring my sweater in here close. Yeah. So you can see that I added my short rows. I'm going to try to do this backwards on the camera here. And then I went in and reinforced this particular area by doing a duplicate stitch back and forth on each side so that it looks from a distance a little bit like this seam, or this faux seam here, and this faux seam here, and it creates enough of a support right there, because this sweater is knit with yarn held double. It's a very heavy sweater. I didn't use a woolen spun yarn, I used a worsted spun yarn, so it's definitely a very heavy sweater. And not having this structural component go straight up to the collar meant that there was going to be a little bit of stretching potential here in these short rows. So simple fix, you just go in and put in this faux seam, and you add, just do it with a little bit of duplicate stitch and reinforcing, and then it looks like you have a cool seam here alongside these other two faux seams that you have. So I thought that was a kind of cool mod to do. And I also put a turn row in my collar, just like I do for this one. This sweater has a contrasting color. I added a contrasting color for the inside of I turned the collar and I put a contrasting color inside there. This one doesn't have a contrasting color inside, it does have a turned hem, but instead of just leaving it as knit, 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 and kind of like it would create more of a rounded collar, I decided to put my purl row in. Whenever I do a turn row on a hat or on a collar or something like that, I tend to put, or even on a hem, I tend to put a purl row because it creates a nice natural place for the fabric to fold over. So you don't get a rounded fold, you get a much more flat kind of fold. And that's what I did for this particular collar. Now the collar is of course knit double, held double, folded, so it is a chunky thing. I would recommend, I know some people have done modifications where they did more of a crew neck for this sweater, and I think that can look very nice. My preference for this sweater is to have, as long as you're going to go chunky with the whole thing, is to have that kind of longer collar at the top. So that was my preference, and I quite like it. So those are my major modifications. I've pretty much changed a lot of the things about the length and the way the sleeves were put on, the short rows in the back. Thank you to whoever came up with that idea. Again, I'll put their name on the screen back there. And adding that purl row to the collar. So lots of fun modifications that make it a sweater that it fits me so well, and I know I'm going to wear it a lot, just like I wear this one a lot. They're kind of similar in a way, and I'm not super surprised that Isabel Kramer saw this pattern and made her own. She added length as well, and like I said, she did that provisional cast on. So I like her sweaters, obviously I'm wearing them, and so I liked her ideas about how to do a couple of modifications on this one too. Now, the button band that Kate Davies includes for this pattern is, I think, pure genius. The finishing work on this cardigan actually took an entire day of knitting, and it was so worth it. At first, I was reading the pattern and thinking, really, do I want to go to all the trouble to do it in this order and this way? And let me just say, Kate Davies does a brilliant job with finishing this sweater. So if I were you, I would totally follow the finishing instructions, the order, the way that she does her buttonholes, everything about it. It seems really elegant to me. So I'm really glad that I decided to go with all of her ideas about the button bands and the finishing of the collar and all kinds of things. I don't want to say too much to give away the pattern, but finishing is incredible in this sweater. I chose these pretty funky, heavy metal buttons in part, and I'll show you a close-up of them so that you can see them. I'll put a picture in here. I think they're called the Tree of Life or something like that. They have a beautiful kind of turquoise background. They're on a shank, and they're kind of heavy, so they wouldn't be right for a lot of sweaters because they're kind of heavy and they would weigh down the fabric. But on a sweater like this, which is super chunky already, and it kind of holds its own, a heavier metal button can work just fine. I got these buttons from the Button Bird, which is a really cool little indie shop. I'd highly recommend them. And they have all kinds of different buttons. So these are metal. They have wooden buttons and coconut buttons and vintage buttons and so many fun things to kind of pick around with from and choose from. The other button shop I tend to go to is Mood, which is in New York City, and they just have an amazing array of buttons. I went there for the first time with my son when he wanted to visit New York City. We went for a weekend, and we wandered over to Mood, and we spent a lot of time in there looking at buttons, and since then I go on their website often and choose my buttons there, because I do like all of the different styles that they have and the photographs so that you can see the different buttons and their widths and all that kind of good stuff. So those are my two kind of places, go-to places for buttons when I know what I need, pretty much. The best way to get buttons too is to just wander around stores, and when you see cool buttons, just collect them all. Like if I see a cool button, I will often buy enough of them for a sweater, so say like 8 or 10 or something like that. Just keep them in my stash, and then I'll find a sweater to put them on eventually. So these buttons, you can see, work really well with this sweater because in part it's such a gray background, right? It's this beautiful Jacob gray, which has a little bit of a matte or a flat kind of finish to it. So my thinking was that these buttons would provide the exact color pop that kind of was needed to light up this sweater a little bit. So yeah, I'm really pretty excited about it. One thing I did notice, and this is something to notice if you're working with small batch yarns, and even with commercial yarns, you may find this less often. Occasionally you'll get to a spot in the yarn where it's been overspun or underspun. So you're going to have a big poofy part or a part that's kind of gotten ropey. Because as I said, this yarn is really plump, it's springy, it has these characteristics that make it perfect for this really squishable cardigan, right? But I did encounter one portion of the yarn, and I'm not sure you can see it right here, that was a little bit overspun by the mill. And by a portion, I mean probably 2 or 3 yards, maybe even just 1 or 2 yards of it. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. I wasn't really paying attention. I was like, usually when I get to something like that, I would snip it, remove that section, and then, rejoin the yarn. But I didn't for some reason. I must have been distracted. Talked about a lot lately about distracted knitting. And I went ahead and knit with it. And then once I was done washing the sweater, I did notice that there is a small row, and it really is, it must have just been like a yard of the yarn that's a little bit overspun, and so the stitch sizing and the tension is just a little funny right there. I think it's kind of cool in the end because, like I've talked about in here a lot, these handmade objects, they all have little quirks, they all have little idiosyncrasies, and that's just one of them. It just gives me a sense of like the yarn as a unique kind of object. And me as a knitter, I could have taken that little bit of yarn out, but I didn't. I just let it play out. And it's given the sweater just this one little moment when I can, even just I notice it, but it's just kind of interesting to think about. If you want to avoid that, whenever you get to one of those kind of loosely spun, underspun, or overspun portions of your yarn, whether it's from a small batch or commercial batch or skein, just snip it out, rejoin your yarn, and there you go. It's not that big of a deal. And if you're worried about, oh, I'm wasting the yarn, you're not really, because there's a certain amount of waste that's built into patterns usually. There's a certain amount of extra yarn, 10% or so, that's built into the quantities that you need. So if you're snipping out a yard or 2 of this yarn, you're going to be just fine. So if it's something you want to avoid, there's your quick solution. So I am in love with this sweater, and I think part of it is the design, the modifications, but also the yarn. So let me talk to you a little bit about the Jacob sheep and the qualities of this particular yarn. So as always, when we get to sheep breeds, I'm pulling out my fleece and fiber source book, which I got used, and actually my copy is falling apart, as you can see. It was a well-loved copy, library copy, I think, and that's fine with me because I got it used for a good price, and everything is still in there, and it works just fine. You just have to kind of hold on to the cover a little bit. So let's talk about Jacob. They put Jacob sheep in their other sheep breed category. So it's not in the Down family or the Longwool family or the Merino family, etc., etc. It's one of these other sheep breeds that has an interesting kind of history. And according to the authors, and the authors are, of course, Deb Robeson and Carol Acarius, and if you're interested at all in breed-specific wool, I would highly recommend this book because it's really fun to read about where the breeds come from, the qualities, the characteristics, all that kind of really fun information, especially if you're interested in spinning fiber into yarn as well. So they were named for Jacob out of the Bible and that biblical flock of sheep, apparently. They're known for their horns and their multicolored fleece. So if you ever see a Jacob sheep, they can have, I think, 2, 4, or 6 horns, and their fleece, they tend to be, I think there's like, I want to say they think it's like 60% of them are white as their primary color, and then they have spots that are either gray or black or lilac, which is a brownish kind of color. So they have beautiful, interesting coats. They're also a very variable sheep. So if you've encountered, as they say, if you've encountered one Jacob fleece, that's not going to be, what your experience is with that particular Jacob fleece is not going to be the same as your experience with another Jacob fleece, because they really are quite variable across animals and regions. They talk a little bit about how the British Jacob sheep are very different in size than the American version of Jacob sheep, and the British have bred them, I think, for meat and other things. So they have bigger bodies, bigger fleeces, but different qualities of fleece. So the flock that I was working with, this yarn is from Forget Me Not Farm, Candor, New York, American Jacob, smaller, and you know, cool horns and multicolored fleece, which is, I just think is really cool. So what they did this past season, I believe, is that they sorted their fleece into different colors. So right now on their website, they have this gray, this beautiful gray, just like a light gray. They also have a kind of lilac-y brown color. So these are natural colors, a little bit like Shetland has a bunch of different natural colors in their sheep. Alpaca have a bunch of different natural colors. Jacob have, you know, these 4 main colors, and you can do blends of them. So there's just a lot of different play that you can do with Jacob fleece and yarn to create a lot of different colors. So Forget Me Not Farm, Jen and Blessing, I think they totaled up maybe fleece from 1 or 2 years. I couldn't quite figure out if it was 1 or 2 years, and then, you know, sorted for the different colors. So they ended up with this kind of beautiful gray and then this lilac. And you can see, as I was knitting, I could see tiny little flecks of some of the lilac brownish color, some flecks of the white. You know, they're just coming through in all these different interesting ways. So the other thing I would mention about Jacob fleece, let me show you the actual sheep here, because they're really adorable. So this one has just a couple of horns. I think you can see them. And Spencer and I are planning on going out to Jen and Blessing's place this spring and doing a video of their sheep, so hopefully I'll get to show you their actual Jacob sheep soon. And here is the kind of layout of the different yarns and fleece, raw and cleaned, and some of the yarn that the authors spun up here. And I thought it was interesting to hear that the even though they place the Jacob sheep in this other sheep breed category, they think that there are some kind of similarities between the Jacob sheep and the down breeds. And down breeds are really great because some people say that you can even make socks out of like down breeds wool, and that you can wash them, which is really kind of cool. But Jacob fleece are single coated, like I said, predominantly white, and I think you lose quite a little bit when the washing of the fleece. So let's see what they say. 3 to 6 pound fleece, 50 to 65% yield. So you lose a little bit in the processing. And yeah, fiber diameter, if you're interested in that kind of thing, 25 to 35 micron. I think that puts it pretty firmly in the medium wool category, kind of like along the lines of Corriedale. And I would say that this yarn was just a joy to work with. It was so soft. It's just amazed at how soft and kind of sprungy it is. And even held double and knit up into this cardigan, you can still see that it just has a lot of give to it. It has a lot of sproing and kind of like life to it, which I really love. I feel like it's a very lively kind of fiber and yarn. So yeah, so this is Jen and Blessing of Forget Me Not Farm, 100% Jacob wool. They still have some on their website for this beautiful gray and that lilac brown if you're interested. And I kind of want to get one more sweater's quantity worth from them, because it is such a unique, interesting yarn. To find 100% Jacob yarn is no small feat. So yay for small producers. Thanks to Jen and Blessing for raising the cool sheep and getting the yarn spun up, or the fiber spun up, so that those of us who are knitters can use it in sweaters like this. Yeah. And as long as we're talking about breed-specific wool and small batch farms, I like to feature farms and producers even if they're not in my shop, because I think it really helps them get some exposure. And if you're local to them, then you're within their fiber shed and you can be supporting them more directly. So like for example, I know I have Ranching Tradition Fiber in the shop, which is beautiful DK weight yarn, hand-dyed, Targhee Rambouillet blend. It's beautiful. But I've had some people contact me and say, oh my gosh, thanks for featuring her and having her in the shop. I'm going to go down the road and pick some up from her farm store. So if you're within the fiber shed of these small batch producers, you can help them out by going and buying their yarn directly. So yeah, so I have one more for you. This is from Jubilee Farms. This is Cyndy Ash, Jubilee Farms. This producer, she is in Clinton, Illinois. So the website is actually jubileefarmsclinton.com if you're interested. And I just checked out her shop this morning. She and I actually met through a mutual friend in Illinois, Kathy Capel, who sold me all of the fleece for the last few shorn lines. So it's nice to meet people through other people. So she sent me a beautiful skein of her bulky Merino Leicester Longwool cross. So this is the yarn all caked up. It has this gorgeous sheen. I hope the camera is kind of picking up on it. It has this luster to it and this kind of like, it's very silky quality, which is very, it's something that you'd expect from the Longwool portion of this fiber that's in this yarn. And I knit up a little swatch the other day. I'm holding it upside down. There it is, just to show you what it looks like. And you can see it has some beautiful stitch definition. It is I believe it's a 3-ply. Yeah, it's a 3-ply yarn. And I knit this up on size 7 needles, I believe, because it was a, bulky yarn. And you can see it has some beautiful stitch definition, and you get a little bit of that luster coming through in the final swatch. So I'll put her information in the show notes here down below in the description, so if you want to check out her shop, you can. She has this Merino Leicester Longwool. She also has 100% Merino, which is in a beautiful natural brown, and she has some alpaca over there as well. So and some hand-dyed yarn, I think, which is maybe on this base and maybe on the Merino base. I couldn't quite tell. But beautiful yarn. I highly recommend that you get a blend that has some Longwool in it if you're interested in some luster, because the luster of that is just, I really am not sure the camera is picking up on it, but it has this just gorgeous kind of sheen to the yarn, which I love working with. And for comparison's sake, this is 100% Longwool, Leicester Longwool that we have in the shop. This is Heirloom by Kathy Capel, and this is about 250 yards in the natural kind of gray blended color, which is beautiful. But you can see there's a certain sheen to it. I think the camera is picking up on in the light. Yeah, there you go. It has a real sheen to it, but 100% Longwool can, depending on how it's spun, you have to be careful spinning it because it can turn out kind of ropey, and that's what you don't want. And it's one of the reasons I think that a blend of Longwool with something else like a Merino or Corriedale or Cormo or something can be just a kind of perfect blend, and this yarn is absolutely gorgeous. This stuff from Jubilee Farms, love it. And then we also in the shop have Prairie Shepherd's yarn in a white natural color, and this is Leicester Longwool, Cormo, and Corriedale. So again, you get the sheen from the Longwool, but you also get the beautiful kind of softness from the Corriedale and the strength and from the Leicester Longwool, and the kind of medium go-in micron count from the Corriedale. So you get a really nice blend, and it is like a very soft, squishy yarn, and I quite love it. So we have these two in the shop, Prairie Shepherd's and Heirloom, and if you want to check out the Jubilee Farms Merino Leicester Longwool cross, like I said, I'll put her shop info down below, so if you're in her fiber shed, you can absolutely support her and the work that she's doing over there with her small flock. So I think that's about it for today. Thanks for joining me, and if you have made a Carbeth, I know so many of you have made Carbeths, I'd love to know about your version of the Carbeth and what you love about it, what yarn you used, how it's fitting, how it's holding up, whether you did any modifications to the pattern. So please leave me a comment here and we can share our Carbeth stories below. In the meantime, I hope you have a good week or two ahead of you, and I'll try to be back here in the yarn room in a couple of weeks to see you again. All right, take care. Bye-bye.